Okay, so this is Dr. Ben again with another presentation. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Dr. Ben Davis, nuclear physicist turned software developer turned controls engineer turned college professor. And so I do these cons mostly for fun. I don't have any books to sell or anything like that. Actually, I got into the con thing before I became a teacher again. So the whole doing the presentations things was teaching was feeding my teaching bug. So that's kind of why I started doing this stuff years ago. This particular talk is, I don't know, it's not super old. It's one of my middle grade ones from about 3 or 4 years ago. It's entitled IGY, Where's My Flying Car, Damn It? So this is all about the predictions that were made in the 50s, mid 50s, about what the future was going to be like and sort of the optimistic point of view that they had back then. And originally I based it on the song IGY, which is the Donald Fagen song. I think it's actually Steely Dan. And IGY is the title of the IGY of the title refers to the International Geophysical Year, an event that ran from July 1957 to December 1958. The IGY was an international scientific project promoting collaboration among the world's scientists. In 1982, Steely Dan released the song named IGY, written by Donald Fagen. Fagen's lyrics reference from the point of view of that time an optimistic vision of the future concepts such as solar-powered cities, a transatlantic tunnel, permanent space stations, and spandex jackets. What a beautiful world this will be, but not quite the way we imagined. Why did they get it all so wrong? So this is as much sort of a discussion as to why it's hard to predict the future. Even now, if you tried to reach, they were trying to, in 1957, they were trying to make a prediction from, 20 years into the future. So they were trying to think out to like 1976. And yeah, they missed completely. Now imagine if we were to try to have a conference like that now and try to imagine what life would be like in 20 years. And we'd probably miss even worse than they did. When all was said and done. So first slide, obviously, is the lyrics of the song. For copyright reasons, I don't have an MP3 to play or anything like that, but I think it's okay to copy the lyrics off the internet and show them to you. And usually, I start to sing it and we end up in a sing-along when we're in a room with each other. But you know the song. What a beautiful world this will be. What a glorious time to be free. Okay, I'll stop now. So we're going to go through the lyrics and we're going to talk about all these predictions that were made just because I thought it would be fun when I wrote this, and so it is fun. It worked out pretty well. And we'll go have that fun now. And we're going to break these lyrics down piece by piece and we're going to talk about everything. So what's our first thing to happen? To talk about undersea by rail. On that train, all graphite and glitter, undersea by rail, 90 minutes from New York to Paris. Well, by 76, we'll be A-okay. And so, all right, what the frig happened? Well, one of the things that happened that they weren't real schooled upon back in 1957 was plate tectonics. It didn't occur to them that to build a tunnel underneath the ocean from New York to Paris was going to involve going across tectonic plates that actually move over time. That is not nearly as feasible of a deal as what they might have thought back 50 years ago. The distance from New York to Paris is 3,625 miles. How far have we gotten with this? You'd think that prediction is completely ridiculous. It is not completely ridiculous. The closest thing I could get to compare and talk about this was the tunnel, which was completed in October 1990. It goes under the English Channel, of course. It's 23.5 miles. It took 6 years and $15 billion in 2016 dollars to build. But it also brought in the development of some interesting technology. You have these boring machines. They look like big worms, and they've got drill bits basically built into the front of them, and they turn around and they spray water to sort of wash the dust out, keep the bits clean, and all the big chunks of rock go through the little holes and end up on a conveyor belt behind this big worm, this big boring machine. And I don't know, it cuts at a pretty impressive rate now. And most people don't understand just how ubiquitous these things are. They're kind of all over the place. And, you don't see them every day, of course, but they were used in the Boston Big Dig. I think as far as I know, their biggest win is something called the Gothard Base Tunnel that they were working on back when I originally wrote this talk. And they're actually boring a tunnel, I believe they're finished with it now, under the Alps. And I forget the numbers, but I think it was about 35 or 45 miles. And they went from Switzerland to Italy, directly underneath the Alps. So you don't have to go up the mountain and back down the mountain again to get through there. These tunnels can have railroad cars in them, or they can have road beds for cars, regular cars to travel through. And like I said, Boston Big Dig is another example. And what else was I going to say? I had thought in my head, went right out. That's what happens when you start recording talks at 9:30 at night. Oh yeah, they actually have several boring tunnels, as I understand it, in Seattle right now because the city is so congested with traffic. And so they're building an entire network of these tunnels to hopefully make a subway system and underground roads in the very near future. So, okay, you can't exactly plow 3,600 miles with these things, but if you really wanted to, you could. And for example, the plate tectonic problem could be solved because the big tectonic plate in the Atlantic Ocean, if you can see my mouse pointer, runs right through Iceland. So if you really wanted to do this, you could build a system that ran from New York to Iceland, have a station where everybody was dropped off, switch trains, walked on the other side of the tectonic plate, and if it moved a few feet or a few inches a year, whatever, you just you walk over to the other station, take your luggage with you, and get in the next train and do the next leg of the trip. We worked it out. I worked out the math before. We decided that it's about, let's say, $1 billion a mile now. So this could end up costing as much as $3.6 trillion, which sounds like a lot of money. And it is a lot of money, but, by way of comparison, it's 3 aircraft carriers. So if two countries like the United States and France really wanted to do it and really saw the value in it, they could. But in economic terms, it's not very feasible. It's just easier to get on a freaking plane and call it a day. You can actually do maybe not New York to Paris in 90 minutes, but the Concorde could do New York to Paris in 3 hours. So that's pretty close. And I guess a regular jet trip takes about 8, maybe 10 hours from New York to Paris. So again, the real question becomes economics. We'll talk about the Concorde later, so I'll save the punchline for that until we get a little further down the road on the talk. But it's all a question of money. You got enough money, you can do it. Will it ever really happen? No. This is just one of those things that might be technically feasible, but I don't think anybody's ever really going to do it. It's just not, it just won't add that much value for anyone involved. And there's other reasons. Travel is not as big of a deal as it once was, thanks to the internet. And we'll talk more about that later as well. Get your ticket to that wheel in space while there's time. The fix is in. You'll be a witness to that game of chance in the sky. So this is the Arthur C. Clarke version of a space station, where you've got the spinning wheel type structure as shown in the upper right there. I'm having a sip of tea, so give me a minute. That's to make artificial gravity. So the centrifugal force sort of throws you to the outside of this thing and you feel like you're standing on something that's got gravity in it. Why didn't it happen? Well, Elon Musk, for example, says SpaceX's latest rocket in development, the Falcon Heavy, which they are now well in development with, they've actually made a few of them, will be able to do it for as little as $1,000 a pound. Historically, that's pretty low. Using the space shuttle to get a pound of something to the space station, for example, cost around $10,000. So again, economics rears its ugly head. Currently, even with SpaceX and their contributions, it still functionally costs about $10,000 a pound to put anything into low Earth orbit. If you're involved in SpaceX, you might get that cost down to $5,000 or $6,000 a pound. They can certainly do it cheaper than the government, but that's a lot of money when you think about it. But even at $1,000 a pound, it's probably not cheap enough to make spaceflight an ordinary event for most of us. Sending a person into orbit would still run more than $100,000. That's assuming you only weigh 100 pounds, right? If you're like most of us, you weigh probably a bit more than that. How far have we gotten? The ISS is arguably the most expensive single item ever constructed. In 2010, the cost was expected to be $150 billion. This includes NASA's budget of $58.7 billion, inflation adjusted, or the station from 1985 to 2015. $72.4 billion in 2010 dollars. Russia's $12 billion, Europe's $5 billion, Japan's $5 billion, Canada's $2 billion, and the cost of 36 shuttle flights to build the station in the first place, estimated at $1.4 billion each. Our your $50.4 billion in total that we've already quoted. So what does that really mean in terms of day-to-day cost? Assuming 20,000 person days of use from 2000 to 2015 by 2 to 6 person crews, each person day would cost $7.5 million. Less than half the inflation adjusted $19.6 million per person day of Skylab. So it's considerably less when you consider moving, the evolution from Skylab to the International Space Station. It's a reduction of almost a factor of 4 there, but it's still a lot of money. When will it happen? My best estimate is going to be something like 100 years. And as I say, nature is a mother, so is economics. You won't be going unless you really need to go, unless you've got some scientific reason to go, or you're backed by a government, or you're super, super wealthy, like Jeff Bezos, for example. It's great that you've got these billionaires like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos trying to get into space. I think it's wonderful that they're there to push the technology forward, but there's a reason that it's been this long and nobody's privatized the exploration of space. And it's dangerous, so there's the legal issues, but there's also just the downright cost of it. Even if you've got somebody that says, I'll sign whatever waiver and take whatever risk, and I won't hold anybody accountable if I die, it's still a hell of a lot of money. So you better have some damn good reason for going. Nice vision. It's a shame it didn't happen. Maybe in 100 years. So, powered by the sun. Here at home, we'll play in the city, powered by the sun. So solar power is sort of there. A lot of people get excited about it. But let's move on through the slide here. So why didn't it happen? It's a far bigger challenge than most people seem to realize, even scientists. There are solar plants in operation, but actual power costs average around 35 cents a kilowatt hour. Coal, gas, nuclear, and hydrodynamic can all compete in the range of 8 to 12 cents a kilowatt hour. So who's ready to pay 4 times more for their electricity? Because if we were to actually run on solar power, that's what it would cost you. So this graph over here shows something called the levelized cost of energy. When I first gave this talk, somebody asked, is this the upfront cost? Is this the day-to-day cost? How does this work? The concept of the levelized cost of energy will take whatever plant you've got, ask what its lifetime is, ask how many kilowatts of power, or really how many gigajoules, terajoules of power it produces over time, and basically divide out its cost per unit time per amount of power that it produces. And so this levelized cost of energy is actually a very fair way of comparing it. And even under those circumstances, you're still looking at about 35 cents per kilowatt hour for solar. Solar cells do burn out. They only have a lifespan of about 30 years. So, they have to be replaced just like everything else. So we just move the graph over. We take another section here. And, I did this because when I first did this talk, I live in Greenville, South Carolina. And all my friends were getting phone calls about getting solar energy on their roofs. And so I did this sort of as a way of saying, this is what you're going to get into when you do this. So at the time of this writing, the installed cost of solar panels was between $7 to $9 per watt. A 5 kilowatt system would cost around $25,000 to $35,000. Many utility companies offer incentives, and some subsidize as much as 50% of the system cost. You also tend to get tax benefits, thanks to our government, for doing this kind of thing. So the only reason this thing works at all, in truth, is because of government subsidies. So in 2015, the average annual electricity consumption for a U.S. residential utility customer was 10,800 kilowatt hours. That would be, I'm pretty sure, per day. At 12 cents a kilowatt hour, the average cost of electricity is about $1,300 a year. Maintenance costs are on the order of $500 a year for a solar panel system if you get it, put on your house. At 0% APR, which is fair because of the government subsidies or whatever, or the utility subsidizing it, you probably can get a 0% loan to have this $30,000, thing put on your roof, the inverter, mounted to your side wall. So 0% APR and a $30,000 charge for installation. It'll take you about 37.5 years to break even, with the maintenance cost of about $500 per year and the fact that they have to do annual inspections on this thing. So it'll actually take you about 37.5 years to break even on just buying power from the grid. Now, there's another talk that I'm very much aware of because I recorded it about, solar power and home generators. And they tell you fast, if you've listened to that talk, particularly at the end, that nothing beats nuclear power off the grid. So it's great to have those discussions and to do those things, but they're more for if you're in some remote area and you don't have access to the grid. So yeah, take you 37.5 years to break even, at which time you'll probably need a new system. The truth be told, you'll probably need a new system before you can even break even. So yeah, when will it happen? A reasonable answer might be another 10 years or so. So if you think you've missed out on the solar future, no, it's still not really ready for prime time. The only reason somebody thinks it's ready for prime time is because the government incentives involved in it. Weather control. Perfect weather for a streamlined world. There'll be spandex jackets, one for everyone. Yeah, that's a joke. So why didn't it happen? If weather control was actually a premise of the song, then it was ridiculous to begin with. How far have we gotten? Yeah, no, it's not happening. I don't think anybody's even seriously researching this. When will it happen? I could actually see this happening in parallel with efforts in terraforming on other planets. So if Elon Musk actually gets people to Mars in the next 6 years or so, I could see discussions about terraforming and what it would take to actually change the climate of a planet in, say, 15 years, and then some sort of maybe inroads with it in another 15 years beyond that. So 30 to 50 years. That's not really, I mean, I just put this slide in there for fun. The other thing I put in there for fun is the picture of the HARP facility over here on the left. That's a government facility in Alaska. They just sold it because, you know, they did whatever research they were doing on the ionosphere there. It's the source of a lot of conspiracy theories about the government trying to control the weather. Again, if you know anything about electrodynamics, you look at those things and you realize those are passive antennas and they will not be transmitting enough power into the upper atmosphere to be changing the weather. But it was a cool project, and I don't really think much came of it, you know, but they did do ionospheric studies there. The other picture on the right is just fun. These are hurricane tracks through the ocean, hurricanes and cyclones. I just put it in there for fun because I think it's cool to see it. The power of a hurricane, you know, as much as people talk about saying ridiculous things like blowing them out with a nuclear bomb or whatever, the power of a hurricane is orders of magnitude greater than any nuclear bomb we've ever made. And you see that there's a lot of them every year. The other thing that's cool about this is you see all these tracks and you see where the equator of the Earth is. This is strictly a force called the Coriolis force that's due to the spinning of the Earth. It's not a true force. It's a spinning effect. In fact, the Earth rotates. And it's a lot of hot air rising over a warm ocean, causing basically a Venturi type effect where the hot air rises, the coolant rushes in underneath, and the Coriolis force causes that spinning cyclone that we know to be a hurricane. And there is nothing made by man that can come anywhere close to the types of energy we're talking about when that happens in the open ocean. Perfect weather for streamlined world. There'll be spandex jackets, one for everyone. So, okay, we can have this one. You can call this one a win if you want to. If you want a spandex jacket, this is one you can have. We made it. Hooray. Spandex is kind of already trite. I don't think people wear it a lot anymore, but there it is if you want it. You certainly have it. A just machine to make big decisions, programmed by fellows with compassion and vision. So why didn't this happen? Why isn't our society run by basically AI, artificial intelligence? There was a profound lack of understanding in what it takes to make AI. Neither the human brain nor computer science was well understood in 1957. Giving up control to AI is something people worry about today, so they also misread human nature. People are a lot more paranoid now, particularly with government and with scientific progress than they were back in the 50s. You know, back then people would have been thrilled to have a machine to give them a logical course of action, you know, for whatever problem they were having, you know, and assume that the scientists that made it, you know, were brilliant and had good intentions. And now, you know, we live in a world where you talk about AI and the first thing anybody mentions is Terminator. So everybody's paranoid that even if we have decent artificial intelligence, the first thing that it would do is try to replace us. Or maybe the other scenario is that it would be benevolent and it would treat us like pets and not let us do what we want, but sort of keep us safe, from ourselves, like, big overgrown parents. So there's a lot of pushback now for people to even use AI in that way. So how far have we gotten though? Actually, much further than most people would imagine. Here I used Watson as the example, and this is from their Jeopardy match where Watson played all of the old Jeopardy champions and basically won against all of them. And what has Watson been doing since it won Jeopardy? IBM announced a partnership with Cleveland Clinic in October 2012. The company has sent Watson to Cleveland Clinic Lerner College of Medicine at Case Western Reserve University, where it will increase its health expertise and assist medical professionals in treating patients. The medical facility will utilize Watson's ability to store and process large quantities of information to help speed up and increase the accuracy of the treatment process. Cleveland Clinic's collaboration with IBM is exciting because it offers us the opportunity to teach Watson to think in ways that have the potential to make it a powerful tool in medicine, said C. Martin Harris, MD, Chief Information Officer at Cleveland Clinic. On February 8, 2013, IBM announced that oncologists at the Maine Center for Cancer Medicine and WestMed Medical Group in New York have started to test the Watson supercomputer system in an effort to recommend treatment for lung cancer. So what happened to Watson after it won Jeopardy? They sent it to medical school. And in sending it to medical school, they then installed it at a hospital in Cleveland, where it sits and reads every medical journal that gets published. There was a 60 Minutes piece done on this back in, I think it was 2016 or so. If you haven't seen it, it's worth looking up, because this particular article is saying this is what we're going to do, and in truth, this has already been done. So Watson sits there and does what even the most brilliant doctor can't do. It reads every medical paper that comes out, and then it looks at MRIs of real patients and makes real recommendations for and diagnoses and recommendations for treatment. And it's actually, the doctors love it. They actually swear by it. It's better at coming up with treatment options and treatment recommendations than any human doctor is. So this thing is going around treating people for cancer, or at least telling us how to treat people for cancer. The 60 Minutes piece is a little heartbreaking because when I first gave this talk, somebody asked, does it factor in financial costs and insurance and things like that? And I'm pretty sure that it absolutely does not. It just recommends the treatment that it would think be best for whatever type of cancer the person had and how far it had advanced. And even when they did the 60 Minutes segment, they did one person in particular that was recommended a certain treatment, and she basically died before the insurance company would approve the cost to do it. And so everybody was pissed off about that. But this is already there. You've got a machine that basically decides what your cancer treatment is, depending on where you're going to the hospital. I personally think that's pretty damn cool. Of course, that's not the only place Watson shows up. You've got Watson in the cloud, so that it actually does business type things, recommendations, consulting, that kind of thing. And IBM, I'm sure makes good money on it. So when will it happen? Perhaps never, in one sense of the song. We'll never let computers fully run our lives. But in another sense of the song, it's already happened. It's already making AI is already making sophisticated decisions about the course of our lives, even though they're not making the big political decisions and the ones you might see on the nightly news. And personally, I'm okay with that. And if it turns into Terminator and kills us all later, you got to remember that you're living longer because it saved you from cancer before it decided to kill you. will be clean when their work is done. Will be eternally free and eternally young. But why didn't it happen? Now, this is a whole nother conversation. This is a philosophical discussion that I always seem to get into whenever we talk about the singularity or any of these other things. We're not made to live forever. And it's pretty childish of us to even want that. That wouldn't be an evolutionary advantage to our species. The way life works is that you come and you adjust to your environment at that time, and you live your time and you have children, and then you die and you make room for somebody else. And they may have a different environment as the world changes over time. They have to adjust to, and the ones that can thrive in that environment are the ones that survive and continue the species, and the ones that can't thrive in that environment probably don't reproduce or don't reproduce as many kids. And it's how our species evolves and adjusts. So if you were to actually make a world where everybody lived forever, then you would by necessity either have to start shipping them off to other planets or stop having children, because eventually the world will become overpopulated. We're not quite ready for that yet. In a sense, it would be kind of cool to have 200-year-old people to go and talk to and get advice from, but that's not really what we're made to do. It's not what any living thing is made to do, whether it's self-aware or not. How far have we gotten? It's taken us 50 years to gain 9 years of life expectancy. That in and of itself is actually pretty good when you think about it. If you live a year, statistically, you're probably going to have a life expectancy of about 1.2 years. That is of an additional 1.2 years. That is not a prescription for eternal life, of course, but you're not going to be immortal doing that. But the chances of you living longer than your parents and your grandparents are pretty damn good. When will the other happen? Pills to fix ailments and eternally young? Truly never. And I'm not sure you should ever really want that either. Rage at the dying of the light if you like, but that's nature and that's life. Now, a little more personal advice, just like the solar cells. New research published by PLOS Medicine has actually put a number on the benefits of physical exercise. You want to live longer? That's how you do it. Finding that 150 minutes of moderate exercise a week, think 5 days, 30-minute workouts like walking, cycling, or hiking, will earn you an extra 3.4 years. And even just 75 minutes a week, or 10 minutes a day, could extend your life by 1.8 years. If you want to talk about that in economic terms, 30-minute workout, 5 days a week is, that's 1/48th of your day, right? 1/50th by the time you throw in weekends and you're not working out on the weekends. So you invest a 50th of your time in exercising. Is that right? That's not right. 1/24th. No, that's right. You invest a 50th of your time in exercising and you get 4 or 5% increase in your lifespan. So you want a prescription to live forever or to live longer, it's the same one you've heard your whole life: diet and exercise. That'll do more for you than anything else will, probably. That's what you should count on first. So that's actually the end of the song. I realized that song doesn't actually have a lot of lyrics to it. And so when I realized that, I made the talk. It's like, well, what other things were they predicting back in the 50s from the movies, from the culture at the time, because otherwise the talk would be over in 35 minutes, right? So no more quoting lyrics to you, just talking about what other things people expected. Undersea living. So why didn't it happen? Why don't we have cities under the water? It's inherently dangerous, and it separates the people involved from the rest of society. There's two ways that you can live under the ocean. You can have a diving bell, which would be great for immersing yourself into the ocean environment, kelp farming, spearfishing, etc. But it means you couldn't easily return to the surface due to the pressure effects. Humans are social creatures. They don't like to be isolated like that. If you have a diving bell and you're, say, 90 feet under the ocean, then you're living in 4 atmospheres of pressure. And the diving bell is open at the bottom. Think of a balloon that you filled up with oxygen. So you really are experiencing that 4 atmospheres of pressure. Now that's fine. Your body can adjust to that. You live in an ocean of air and you live under 1 atmosphere of pressure all the time. As far as living under the ocean goes, fish live in that environment their whole lives and they don't know the difference. The problem comes when you try to go to the surface, when you hear that grandma's sick and you want to go back, to the land to see her, before she dies on you. You're going to have to probably spend a solid week decompressing so that you can walk around in 1 atmosphere of pressure again. You have lots of extra nitrogen and other things built up in your bloodstream. And if you try to immediately go to the surface, you're going to pop like a soda can being opened. And you're not going to have a good day when that happens. So what's your other option? Your other option is a sealed vessel, like a submarine. A sealed vessel makes returning to the surface easy because it maintains that 1 atmosphere of pressure around you, but it isolates you from the environment. What would be the point? Any leak could be a potential disaster. Any breach of the hull could be a potential disaster. And you'd effectively be on a submarine that didn't go anywhere if it was a city. And you couldn't go out and go kelp farming or spearfishing because the ocean would still be under pressure compared to what you were used to living in. So that isolates you from the environment that you're trying to get into. So unless you're trying to fire nuclear missiles at your enemy or threaten to do that, there's not a whole lot of reason for just living at the bottom of the ocean in a submarine. How far have we gotten? Basically nowhere, but it's technically feasible. There are some really cool hotels out there now. Some of them have just recently come online. Some of these are brand new. They, of course, are luxury hotels. The Poseidon Resort in Fiji, you've got a bedroom that's underwater. You've got this big aquarium type view from your room. And then you've got this Hydropolis Atlantis in Dubai. Super nice hotel, probably cost you $500 a night to stay there. And it's probably only under 20 or 30 feet of water. So it's not like you're really in the deep ocean. So if you're really into the ocean and fishes, that's great, but you're going to pay for the experience. There is one other that I thought was interesting when I researched it. It's the Jules Undersea Lodge in Key Largo, Florida. It is actually an old experimental Navy project where they were trying to see if people could live in underwater conditions for extended periods of time. And then when they finished the project, some privateer came and bought the modules from them and made a hotel out of it. And so in this picture, there's a guy delivering a pizza underwater to your room underwater in this hotel. It's cool, it's kitschy. It definitely has a 60s, 70s feel to it if you go there. And your big bragging right is that you had a pizza delivered to you underwater. Probably spending $250 a night for the privilege, and you still have to pay for the pizza if you order it and they bring it to you. But having pizza brought to you in a dry box would be an interesting story you could tell, I guess, for a little while. When will it happen? It depends on population growth. If it becomes necessary, some people might move out into the ocean, just like some people might move out into space. The world, the UN is, and what is that? What do they call that? The world, I forget. Anyway, the World Council or whoever has made predictions that we'll probably top out at 10 billion in population. So this will probably never really be necessary. Population growth won't get so far out of hand that we'll ever have to live under the ocean, unless you're just into that and you're willing to be isolated from the rest of society when you do it. Robots and AI. So why didn't it happen? Well, we don't have Robbie the robot or anything like the picture to, Lost in Space up there in the upper right. But I'm calling this one a win. You do have industrial robots that are very sophisticated. And of course, you have voice recognition. Everybody's got an Amazon Echo in their house now, unless they're paranoid about, being overheard by the government or something. Much further than the IGY guys ever dreamed. It's just different in its look and feel. So when will it happen? It's happening now. The most impressive thing is our robot friend Baxter there. He's the brainchild of an MIT, a guy at MIT, an engineer. And it's really 2 articulated robot arms with a central processing unit. And the thing that's most clever about it, there's actually a few things that are clever about it. You wheel this thing in, you bolt it to the floor, and you grab its arms and you start moving it around and you say, pick up this piece, move it over to this welder, turn on this output so the welder turns on. Once you've welded it for, say, 20 seconds, then move it over to this position, turn it over, put it on this grinder, do this thing, then set it down. And it learns that repetitive motion from whoever's teaching it. So you got the guy on the assembly line that's been doing the same job for 30 years. You wheel in Baxter here, and he teaches the movements to Baxter in a day, and now he's replaced that guy. But it goes a step further. We all know about robots replacing assembly line workers. This robot replaces the programmers that used to have to write the lines of code to make that robot work and do its job. This robot learns on the fly. The other thing that's interesting about this robot, the old industrial robots, if you didn't put a safety cage around them, might swing around and knock somebody's head off if they got too close. This thing's got sensors in the arms, and if it feels any kind of resistance in any sort of direction that isn't supposed to be there, that it's not used to feeling, it will turn itself off. So it has a sensory perception that the old industrial robots don't. And of course, you see the little monitor they put on it with the eyes, which is there to give you a sense, if you walk by this robot, what it's looking at, what it's doing, and where its next movement is going. So it's actually very sophisticated. When they originally started putting these robots into production, they said they were going to cost at a price point of around $25,000. That's about half the price of a standard industrial robot. So if this project is moving along, it's just a matter of time before these things will be everywhere. And again, they won't just be replacing the workers on the line, they'll be replacing the programmers too that used to program these things, and the engineers that used to make all this stuff work. In other words, it's a job I used to have. Exponential growth in computing. This is actually from my singularity talk. This is basically just here to let you know that Moore's law is still alive and well. It might be topping out. It looks like it might be flattening out now, but it's still pretty much doubling every 2 years or whatever in transistor density. So expect major changes in AI over the next 5 years, paving the way for sophisticated autonomous robots by 2020, let's say 2025 now, because we've effectively lost a year and a half to COVID. But it's still, marching forward. Progress is still real. Okay, so what about the flying cars? Why did it happen? Because people are stupid and they can't be trusted. And having a 2,000-pound object fall from the sky is not cool for the rest of us. There's a picture. I always kind of laugh at that picture. I guess that's my Mean Streak coming out. Kid about to get run over because the guy's texting on his phone in his car. If you can't trust that Chuzzlewit to drive a car, you sure can't trust him to drive something flying through the air at 10,000 feet and 300 miles an hour. But how far have we gotten? Prototypes exist, but production models will be expensive. This Muller International Sky Car, I remember seeing this guy on, I don't know, some show on the Science Channel, back when the Science Channel actually still showed things that were related to science. He's been working on that particular Sky Car for about 30 years. And it's probably pretty impressive with its specs and what it can do. There's also the Terrafugia, which I think, if I remember right, is an Italian version. These things probably start at $500,000 or so. So it's feasible. It can be done. It requires a lot of training, and you get the government involved, like in the United States, it'd be the FAA, trying to make sure that you were properly trained to fly something like this. And the price point, not only for the vehicle, but for the training involved, is going to be out of reach for most of us. And you can thank the government for making sure that it'll stay out of reach for most of us. As with undersea living, the tech is in place. It's a question of social necessity and feasibility. And the next thing I'm going to tell you is that you probably won't care that you don't have a flying car. It's far more likely we'll get something completely different. So again, this slideshow is actually a few years old now, but Ford announced 5 years ago that it was going to have a self-driving car in 2021. And this particular one is probably going to be have a pretty good price point too. It's probably going to be affordable by the average person. So I haven't heard anything new on this, any updates on it lately. But again, we lost about 1.5 years to COVID, but it will probably be out in a couple of years. And so maybe you don't care that you have a flying car to take you to work. Maybe you don't mind that you're still stuck in traffic, particularly if you get to sit in the back seat and read the paper while the car drives you to work. And last time I said that, somebody laughed and said, "Paper, what's that?" Okay, fine. Read your tablet on the way to work. Because the other thing this thing is going to bring about is improved Wi-Fi networks all over town, so that its electronics work and its awareness of other cars around it and that kind of thing. So you don't get the flying car, but you get something that's kind of just as good. You get something that you get to relax in as if you're in the comfort of your own living room. And if it takes you 2.5 hours to get to work because of your commute, you're probably going to be more okay with it than you used to be when you had to manually drive your car. The personal jetpack was one that everybody got excited about. Why didn't it happen? They were never anything more than an oddity, but Buck Rogers is cool after all. How far have we gotten? Nowhere since the 60s, but there are alternatives, as you see in the pictures. The jetpack that you see on the left is really neat, but one of the things that you have, and they still use them, you'll still occasionally see them. Somebody will fly one in and land on the football field, before the big game or whatever, to excite the crowd, that kind of thing. But this uses chemical fuels. As I recall, I think it actually uses hydrogen peroxide. One of those fuels, as soon as you mix them with oxygen, it ignites. And it's actually pretty reliable, but it's only got about 30 seconds of fuel in it, maybe a minute in a stretch. So the people that fly these things in the football games are trained to take off with them very quickly, fly across over the stadium, whatever they got to do, and land in the middle of the football field all in 30 seconds, so that they still have a reserve in their jetpack. If you're up 300 feet in the air when this thing runs out of fuel, you're going to have a bad day. So again, you're not going to have the average Joe Schmo trying to fly this thing. And even if he did, What good would it be if you're only good for being up in the air for 30 seconds? It's not like you can actually do anything real with it. But there are alternatives. You've got the ducted prop guy, that can fly in that thing, which uses a standard internal combustion engine. And that's actually a pretty feasible thing. You've got the little water jet thing that everybody plays with now. They're actually starting to become pretty ubiquitous, at least, in the resort areas. So if you just wanted experiences and see what it's like, there are ways to do it. And of course, if you're into skydiving and you want to try the little jetpack that you can wear when you're jumping out of an airplane on your way down to the ground, that's an option. But those squirrel suits and all, this is beyond the squirrel suit. But when we looked it up before, those squirrel suits, the requirements, the training requirements on those is that you have to make something like 900 jumps before you're quote unquote qualified to use the squirrel suit. And if you think about that, I don't know exactly what skydiving costs, but let's say $100 a jump. You got to make 900 jumps before you're qualified to fly in a squirrel suit. And then, of course, you've got to buy the squirrel suit, which costs several $1,000s. So again, and it's just fun, right? It doesn't actually do anything from a productive point of view, from commuting to work or anything like that. So if you're really into that kind of thing and you got lots of money, you can do it, but it ain't cheap. If I did the math in my head right, it cost you about $100,000 of training to be able to do something like that. Suborbital passenger jets. Finally, we made it to the Concorde. Why didn't it happen? Economics, as usual. The Concorde was arguably a first step in that direction, and we see what happened there. I flew the last Concorde, I don't know, about 10 years back. Concorde flying transatlantic at Mach 2, burned about the same amount of fuel as a Boeing 747 or similar vintage at Mach 8.85, but carried less than a quarter of as many passengers. So taking all the other cost out, just the fuel cost alone, you could expect the Concorde to cost 4 times as much for your ticket than in a standard jet airliner. So, it just wasn't cost feasible. It was great to fly through the sky at Mach 2, but it was a lot of money. And most people just said, you know what? I don't need to get to Paris in 2 hours or 3 hours. I'll get to Paris in 8 hours and save, 3/4 of my money so that when I get to Paris, I got money to spend. If money is no object to you, then this is the other thing that happened. The corporate jet. The corporate jet can fly somewhere close to Mach 1. You don't have to wait in line. And if you got that kind of money, it's just comfortable and easy. And yeah, it might still take you 6 hours to get to Paris, but you don't care because you're hanging out in the corporate jet in really comfortable seats. The other thing is how far have we gotten? Basically nowhere, but it's technically feasible. You can have atmosphere skimming jets that go hyper Mach speeds and that kind of thing. It's just damned expensive. Just the fuel cost alone makes them damned expensive. And now you live in a world of the internet, and you can do what we're doing right now. If you want to talk to somebody and have a conversation with somebody, you can do it online, and you don't ever have to get out of your pajamas. The other picture there is the old Valkyrie bomber. That was a Mach 3, Mach 4 bomber. So it carried a heavy payload and it could go damn fast. So there's no technical impediment here, just cost. Sometimes you just don't want to spend that kind of money just to get from point A to point B, and you find other ways to do it. So again, when will it happen? Probably never, but the problem is feasibility and cost and nothing else. Cheap nuclear power. Biggest problem with nuclear power, Jim Bell always makes the joke about how when they first came out with nuclear power, we weren't even going to meter it. It was so cheap. nice idea, but thanks to all the safety regulations and that kind of thing, it's never going to be cheap. It's cheaper than solar power, as we discussed earlier, but it's never going to be like free energy. You can thank the bureaucrats for that too. Next big jump will be fusion power. It's about 30 years out. And whenever you ask an engineer when fusion power is going to be, it's going to be about 30 years out. That's the same answer you got if you'd asked an engineer in the 50s. So it's one of these technical hurdles that, keep getting harder and harder to get over. There's more and more wrinkles to it. Cybernetics, 5 or 10 years, this is going to make big inroads soon. And what no one ever saw coming. So these are the things that happened that our friends in 1957 didn't even begin to envision. So now we're back to that original discussion that I alluded to, that predicting the future is just damn hard. Cool things are going to happen. They're just probably not going to be the cool things that you thought were going to happen. So you just got to keep breathing and see where the world goes. And with that, I believe we've made it to the end of the talk. Well, yeah, there's one more slide. Economics is a factor. This is essentially the same thing I just said. There might be some fundamental misunderstandings. Somebody suggested that I put in a slide about warp drive. I personally think that the speed of light really is the intergalactic speed limit. And warp drive is cool for science fiction, but it's probably not going to happen ever. So that's a fundamental misunderstanding as to what you can do. But the future will still be cool. Just not maybe the kind of cool you were thinking. And that's it. We're well into our 50-something minutes. So I'll stop there and let you go so that you can get ready for whatever next talk you're going to. Thank you.